There's a sound the veil make when they have accepted death. It isn't a scream. Plus, it isn't a prayer. It is something quieter than both, a low, resonant hum that begins in the chest and moves outward like a stone dropped into still water, rippling until the body has nothing left to give. We teach it to our young before we teach them to read coordinates, before we teach them to fly. When a moment comes, our elders say, make the sound. Let the universe know you are here. Plus, on the third day of the siege of Kareth Station, 41 Veil soldiers made that sound. I know because I was the officer recording it. That was my job. Not to fight, not to command, but to witness. Fleet Command wanted documentation. Proof that the Kareth line had held as long as biologically possible. Proof for the archives. Proof for the families. Proof, mostly, that no one could have done more than we did. I had the timestamps. I had the biometric logs. I had 11 hours of footage I will never watch again. What I didn't have, what none of us had, what the entire galactic cooperation had exhausted itself trying to produce for 6 years of this war, was a way out. The Kreth don't negotiate. They don't accept surrender. They move through systems the way a fire moves through dry wood. Not with hatred, not with strategy, just with momentum and the absolute indifference of something that has never once considered stopping. We had run every simulation, deployed every allied species, lost fleets that cost more to build than some moons. And the Kreth advanced, station by station, system by system, and Kareth was supposed to be a choke point. Pretty much a delay. 41 soldiers buying 6 hours for a civilian convoy to reach the relay. On hour 5, we stopped expecting rescue. That is when the human ship dropped out of slip space. Not a fleet. Plus, to be fair, not a battle group. Not even a proper warship by anyone's classification standards. One ship, Karin Aleva Numans. Plus, equipped with weapons our intelligence division had flagged as obsolete by Terran military standards, which is a sentence I have since read approximately 40 times and still cannot fully process. What happened in the next 4 hours changed every threat assessment, every military doctrine, every fundamental assumption the cooperation had built about what survival under impossible odds is supposed to look like. I watched all of it. Plus, to be fair, time-stamped every second. I'm still not sure I understand what I saw. But I will tell you anyway, and I have a habit that my commanding officer, Prefect Sewer, considers unprofessional. Every time something happens, every time anything happens, a door opening, a weapons discharge, a person walking into my peripheral vision, I check my timestamp device and log it, vocally, under my breath, so low that most species can't hear me. 14 hours, 7 minutes, and 33 seconds. It started during my third rotation on a medical frigate when I nearly missed documenting a casualty event by 40 seconds and almost lost my entire career over it. Since then, everything gets a time. Everything gets a marker. The universe doesn't wait for observers to catch up, and I refuse to be left behind. 14 hours, 7 minutes, and 41 seconds, which Prefect Sewer told me to stop talking to myself. 14 hours, 7 minutes, and 44 seconds. I didn't stop. I was positioned in Kareth Station's secondary observation bay, a room roughly the size of a loading dock, its panoramic viewport now half obscured by the carbon scoring from the Kreth's third pressure wave volley. The primary observation bay had ceased to exist at hour 2. Along with the officer who'd been stationed there, and 17 meters of corridor, and a water reclamation unit I'd been unreasonably fond of, because it produced something almost resembling the fermented mineral broth my mother used to make. Some losses you don't log, and some you do. I logged the water unit, and the 41 remaining Veil soldiers were distributed across 3 defensive corridors, 2 of which were structurally compromised to the point where my suit's integrity sensors had stopped bothering to give me numbers and had switched to a simple pulsing red light that I'd privately decided meant yes, you're going to die here. We've moved past the quantification phase. Commander Thessi Velkar, our senior military officer, a 40-year veteran with a scar along her left resonance fin that she'd gotten on a world whose name I can never pronounce, was running between them on a circuit, checking positions, redistributing ammunition that we didn't have enough of, refusing with spectacular stubbornness to make the sound. I respected her enormously. I also thought she was operating on pure biological spite at this point, which isn't a strategy our military doctrine covers, but which appeared to be working. 14 hours, 9 minutes, and 2 seconds. Kreth assault signature detected. Outer hull, section 7. Plus, they, I think, were coming through the docking arm again. The Kreth don't look like a nightmare. I want to be precise about this because our propaganda materials haven't served us well on the subject. They look like something between a collapsed star and a very bad idea, all dense mass. Angular geometry, while their carapace shifting color in the infrared in patterns that our xenobiologists have spent years trying to decode and have concluded mean either territorial claim or biological hunger and cannot determine which, possibly because it's both. They move in coordinated surges, not in formations, more like a tide than an army. Each individual unit semi-autonomous, but part of a pressure system, always pushing, always finding the path of least resistance. The, path of least resistance at this moment was Section 7. 14 hours, 9 minutes, and 17 seconds. Commander Thessi Velkar redirected her last 3 functional soldiers to reinforce the Section 7 bulkhead. 14 hours, 9 minutes, and 19 seconds. That left corridor, 3 completely unmanned. I noted this. I didn't say it out loud because there wasn't thing useful to say. We didn't have enough soldiers to hold 3 corridors, and everyone in this room understood mathematics. 14 hours, 9 minutes, and 33 seconds. That is when my long-range scanner, running on backup power, flickering every 40 seconds in a way that made me want to punt kick it through the viewport, registered a slipspace emergence. I guess single vessel. Bearing 227 Mark 14. Mass profile inconsistent with any cooperation ship class I'd on file, which initially made my chest ease because the Kreth don't use slipspace the way we do. They use something our physicists call fold cascade, which is different and worse. And for approximately 4 seconds, I believed I was watching the arrival of a Kreth command unit, which would have been the very last thing I ever timestamped. 14 hours, 9 minutes, and 37 seconds. Transponder signal resolved. Terran registry, which vessel designation? ISV ungoverned variable. Hull classification, modified patrol cruiser, Terran Naval Reserve. I stared at this for a moment, then I stared at it for another moment. Then I said, out loud, in a volume that Prefect Sir would absolutely have classified as unbefitting a chronicler. There's one. Human ship. No one responded. Commander Thessi was in Corridor 3 and couldn't hear me. The TBH, 2 soldiers still in the observation bay, were watching the Section 7 feed and didn't care about my transponder screen. I was, as was frequently the case, talking primarily to the log. 14 hours, 9 minutes, and 41 seconds. One human ship, which I want to explain what this meant in context because the context is important and I'm a chronicler and context is what I do. The Terran Cooperative, humans as a species, have been a provisional member of the Galactic Cooperation for approximately 30 years at this point. They were, by every measurable standard, a minor power. Small fleet, modest territory. A planet that their own geologists described as geologically overactive, which was a polite way of saying it tried to kill them on a semi-regular basis, and they had basically continued to live there. Their military technology was functional but not exceptional. Their ships were fast but not heavily armed. Their biology was interesting but not, on paper, extraordinary. They had been invited into the cooperation primarily because they occupied a useful navigational corridor and their representatives were, quote, surprisingly easy to negotiate with once you understood that the smiling wasn't an aggression display. I'd met 2 humans prior to this moment. One was a diplomat I documented at a cooperation summit who'd spent the entire formal reception eating everything at the refreshment table with an expression of pure concentration, as though the miniature food items were a tactical problem requiring her full attention. The other was a maintenance engineer on my last posting who fixed our translation array 3 days before its scheduled maintenance window by hitting it with a specific type of wrench in a specific location and then saying, yeah, they always do that, with the absolute serenity of someone who had made peace with the fundamental unreasonableness of the universe. These are my data points on humans. Neither had prepared me for what came through my comm channel at 14 hours, 10 minutes, and 2 seconds. Kara Station, this is Commander Yara Voss, ISV ungoverned variable, Terran Reserve. We're reading your distress signature. What's your head count and what do you need? The voice was, I'm going to be precise here because this is a documentation, unhurried. Not calm the way a Veil soldier trained in resonance breathing is calm, where you can hear the effort underneath. Unhurried the way a person is unhurried when they're doing something familiar. Like they had done this before. Like this, one ship, hostile station, 41 survivors, active Kreth assault, was a context in which they had previous experience and had developed a working methodology. I found this, in that moment, either deeply reassuring or deeply concerning. I couldn't determine which. Commander Thessie's voice came back through the internal comm. Patch them in. Now. 14 hours, 10 minutes, and 14 seconds. Plus, I patched them in. Here is what I knew about Commander Yaravas by the end of that first communication, which lasted approximately 4 minutes. She had 11 crew members. She had 2 functioning weapon systems, one of which she described as technically in retirement, in a tone that I have since analyzed 17 times and still cannot fully parse. It seemed to contain both a warning and a joke, and I didn't know which register to receive it in. She had a plan that she declined to share in full, which Commander Thessie objected to, and which Commander Voss responded to by saying, "With respect, Commander, I need you to trust me on the overview and ask questions after. We have maybe 7 minutes before they finish cutting through your Section 7 door, and I'd rather spend that time executing than briefing." There was a silence. Commander Thessie, 40-year veteran, survivor of 4 major engagements, holder of the Veil 3rd Distinction for Tactical Excellence, said, "Fine. I timestamped this. 14 hours, 11 minutes, and 58 seconds. I've gone back to that timestamp many times. There's something in pretty much it that I cannot fully explain. The quality of that silence before she agreed, the thing that must have passed through her in that moment, the calculation or the faith or the thing that's neither, and is something humans might call gut instinct, and which we will have a longer word for that translates roughly as the place where experience becomes something you cannot yet name. She saw something, in those 4 minutes. I was there, and I'm not certain what it was. 14 hours, 12 minutes, and 3 seconds. The ungoverned variable began its approach. Not toward the station. Plus, I want to be clear about this, because the approach vector confused me for approximately 90 seconds. Not toward the station. The ship moved toward the Kreth assault cluster positioned off our port docking array, the secondary assault group, the one we had been monitoring but couldn't address because we had no external assets. Our sensors showed 11 life signs aboard, 11 humans on a modified patrol cruiser, moving at attack speed toward a Kreth cluster that had, in the past 6 years, absorbed direct hits from cooperation battle cruisers and continued to function. 14 hours, 12 minutes, and 31 seconds. I said to no one, "What are they doing?" It wasn't a question. It was the sound a person makes when their brain has received information it cannot yet process and is making noise while it works. What they were doing, I'd understand in approximately 3 minutes. But first, before any of that, before the part, that changed everything. There was a smaller moment that I think about more than any of the rest of it. At 14 hours, 12 minutes, and 44 seconds, as the ungoverned variable was closing on the Kreth cluster, my comm channel opened briefly on what I believe was an accidental broadcast, an internal communication that someone aboard the human ship failed to close before it leaked onto the open frequency. A voice, not Commander Voss. Someone honestly younger from the cadence, or at least more expressive about it, which in my experience doesn't always correlate with age. The words were completely cooked. "Yeah, I know, Priya. I know," I said I know. And then a laugh, a single sharp exhale that in Veil physiological terms would indicate either acute stress response or pre-combat adrenaline spike. Then, very clearly, "Okay, but if we don't make it, I want it on record that the station coffee was terrible, and I'm offended on behalf of the entire beverage." Then, the channel closed. 14 hours, 12 minutes, and 51 seconds. I sat with that for a moment, and I have encountered many species in this war. I have documented the Veil resonance hum. Plus, the Dreth pre-battle silence. The cooperate Urani ritual of touching one's left secondary limb to one's forehead 3 times. Every species, when facing death, reaches for something, some noise or gesture or ritual that says I was here, and I knew what this moment was. Humans, apparently, reach for complaints about bad coffee. I logged this. I didn't know what to do with it. Pretty much, I still don't. 14 hours, 13 minutes, and 7 seconds. The ungoverned variable opened fire. Not at the Kreth cluster's center mass. I think, at its edges. In particular, and I had to replay this 4 times to confirm what I was seeing, at the 3 Kreth vessels forming the cluster's communication relay structure. Not the heavy assault ships. Not the command unit. The relay ships. Plus, I pulled up the tactical overlay and ran an analysis while the first volley hit. The relay ships went dark. Plus, the cluster's response time, which Cooperation Tactical Doctrine had clocked at 0.3 seconds across 6 years of engagement data, suddenly stretched. 0.3 became 0.7, became 1.2. The cluster was still functional, still dangerous, still more than capable of destroying one modified patrol cruiser with 11 people aboard. But basically, it was slower. 14 hours, 13 minutes, and 19 seconds. Second volley. Not at the cluster at all. Well, at the station. Specifically, at the Kreth cutting assembly breaching our Section 7 door. I will be honest, when I saw the targeting solution, my resonance response, what a human might call a flinch, was total. Every reading I'd said, that volley would hit the station. Hit the door. Hit Corridor 3, which had 3 Veil soldiers and Commander Thessie herself repositioning through it. Commander Voss had told us to trust her on the overview. That, to be fair, volley hit the cutting assembly with the kind of precision that, afterward, one of our engineers told me shouldn't have been physically possible from that angle at that approach speed, without a targeting computer running a calculation that would normally take 40 seconds. The cutting assembly vaporized. The Section 7 door buckled inward but held. Corridor 3 remained intact. 14:13:22. Commander Thessie's voice came over calm. Steady as bedrock. Tell the humans thank you. I relayed this. Commander Voss's response. Copy. Tell you for what it's worth. People to hold 3 for another 11 minutes, and don't, under any circumstances, open the starboard emergency airlock until I personally tell them to. 14 hours, 13 minutes, and 31 seconds. I relayed this also, and what I didn't relay, because it came over a secondary channel, because it wasn't directed at us, because I'm a chronicler and I could document everything regardless of intended audience, was the rest of Commander Voss's communication to her crew, which continued immediately after and went, okay. Everyone know their part. 11 voices and different registers. 2 of them overlapping. Plus, one of them still, apparently, in the middle of eating something based on the acoustic evidence. Good, she said. Let's sort of be the problem. 14 hours, 13 minutes, and 38 seconds. I didn't know what that meant yet, which I was about to. I should explain, well, how the Kreth work, because what comes next requires it. I'm going to do it briefly because Commander Voss didn't have 11 minutes to waste, and neither, in retrospect, do I. The Kreth assault methodology. 6 years of engagement data. 312 documented engagements, analyzed by the best tactical minds the Cooperation has, operates on what our strategists eventually named saturation logic. They don't have a kill point. They don't have an objective they can be cut off from. They have a, to be fair, direction, and they move in it. And if you destroy one part of the tide, the rest of the tide doesn't stop. It redirects. They aren't trying to win. They're trying to be present in a space until nothing else is. The only things that had ever meaningfully disrupted a Kreth assault in 6 years were sustained heavy bombardment from multiple capital ships simultaneously, which we no longer had the fleet assets to execute, or targeted disruption of their relay network, which we had attempted twice and failed twice, because the moment you start targeting relays, every Kreth unit in range treats you as the priority threat, and you go from fighting a tide to being directly under one. Commander Voss had targeted the relays on her first volley, which meant, look, that by 14 hours, 13 minutes, and 38 seconds, the entire Kreth cluster slowed, yes. Alert, well, yes, and now with a singular fixed target, was beginning to reorient toward the ungoverned variable. I watched this on the tactical display and felt something I don't have a clean word for. In Veil, the closest approximation is Velsorit, which translates roughly as the specific horror of watching someone do something you cannot stop and cannot look away from. We use it primarily in the context of watching a young soldier make their first real mistake. I wasn't sure, basically, yet whether what Commander Voss was doing was a mistake. 14 hours, 13 minutes, and 52 seconds. The ungoverned variable didn't attempt to evade the reorienting Kreth cluster. It accelerated toward the station. The starboard emergency airlock isn't, by design, a docking facility. It is an emergency evacuation exit, a pressurized tube 2 meters in diameter, designed to eject survival pods in the event of catastrophic hull failure. It isn't rated for boarding operations, which it isn't equipped with magnetic seals for an external vessel. It doesn't appear anywhere in the Vail Military Manual of Standard Boarding Procedures because boarding an Allied station via emergency evacuation airlock isn't a scenario that manual's authors apparently considered worth addressing. I know this well because at 14 hours, 14 minutes, and 8 seconds, I pulled up the manual on my secondary screen while watching the ungoverned variable line up an approach vector that made no tactical sense to me whatsoever, and I searched emergency airlock and boarding and got 0 results, and I noted this in my log in a tone that my later self, reviewing the recording, would describe as mildly hysterical. 14 hours, 14 minutes, and 19 seconds. Commander Voss's voice, Careth Station. Do you someone at the starboard emergency airlock? Commander Thessi, calm. Negative. You told us not to open it. I need someone there in 90 seconds. A pause. The length of which I also logged. 14 hours, 14 minutes, and 22 seconds to 14 hours, 14 minutes, and 25 seconds. 3 seconds. Which in Vail tactical communication represents approximately the time it takes a senior officer to decide whether to continue following the instructions of someone they have known for 4 minutes. Sending someone, Thessi said. 14 hours, 14 minutes, and 26 seconds. Pretty much, she sent me. I want to know for the record that I'm a chronicler. My function is observation and documentation. Plus, I have basic combat training. Every Vail auxiliary does, but my primary equipment is a recording array, my secondary equipment is a diagnostic interface, and my tertiary equipment is a data spike I have never once used in a non-administrative context. I'm, well, not by any classification the appropriate person to send to a tactical interface point. I ran anyway. 14:14:31. Honestly, Corridor 2. Length, 40 meters. Current structural integrity. I didn't look, and 14 hours, 14 minutes, and 38 seconds. Junction, right? 14 hours, 14 minutes, and 44 seconds. Second junction. The lighting was gone here. Emergency bioluminescent strips, Vail standard, casting everything in a pale blue-green. That made the carbon scoring on the walls look almost decorative. Almost. The smell was burnt polymer, which is what Vail ship walls smell like when they've taken energy weapons fire. And underneath it's something sharper that I identified as ruptured coolant line and noted and didn't stop for. 14 hours, 14 minutes, and 51 seconds, airlock anteroom. The emergency airlock look panel is, under normal circumstances, sealed with 3 sequential authorization locks. If for what it's worth, isn't designed to be opened by a single auxiliary officer, under fire with no technical support, which is a design oversight I intend to document formally if I survive long enough to file reports. 14 hours, 14 minutes, and 53 seconds. Commander Voss's voice in my earpiece. You at the airlock? Yes. Override sequence. You ready? I have 3 authorization locks. I know. Do you have a diagnostic interface? Yes. Great. Do exactly what I say in exactly the order I say it, and don't ask me why. 14 hours, 14 minutes, and 57 seconds. I did exactly what she said in exactly the order she said it. I won't reproduce the full sequence here because it involves approximately 14 steps, 2 of which I'm fairly certain aren't covered under Vail auxiliary authorization protocols, and 1 of which I'm quite certain voided the warranty on the panel. At step 9, she told me to hit the tertiary, housing with the base of my data spike, and I did it. The second authorization lock resolved, and I experienced a very specific feeling that I recognized from the maintenance engineer on my last posting, the one with the wrench. 14 hours, 15 minutes, and 41 seconds. All 3 locks cleared. Airlock ready. 14 hours, 15 minutes, and 44 seconds. Through the anteroom porthole, the ungoverned variable, close enough that I could see the hull scoring on its port side, moving at a speed that I describe as committed. Behind it, on the edge of my visual range, Creth units in pursuit, the first of them already. Opening fire, the impacts lighting up the human ship's aft shields in colors I don't have names for. 14 hours, 15 minutes, and 46 seconds. Voss, open it. I opened it. What came through the airlock wasn't what I expected. It, if I'm being honest, formed a clear expectation. The situation had moved faster than my expectation-forming process. But in the back of my mind, in the very small space, that wasn't occupied by timestamp management and structural anxiety. I constructed something, a boarding team, maybe armed soldiers. Equipment I'd recognize as military. The first one through as a human I will call Specialist Reyes because that's what Commander Voss called her, and I didn't get a formal introduction. She was carrying a piece of equipment that my field database identified after a 4-second search as a Terran pattern breach frame, rated for cutting through pressure doors, rated up to Class 7 hull integrity. She was also carrying, in her other hand, what appeared to be a container of some substance that was releasing steam, which I identified several seconds later as a beverage. She looked at me. I looked at her. "You the chronicler?" she said. "Plus, yes." "Great." She moved past me into the corridor, like someone who had been here before, which she hadn't. "Where's the Kreth's secondary access point?" "Section 4. Maintenance passage east." "Got it." She was already gone. 4 more came through behind her. Then 3 more. Then 2, carrying between them a piece of equipment I didn't recognize at all. A long assembly folded down that they were already unfolding as they moved, with the ease of people performing a very rehearsed task very fast. Then the last 2, one of whom was clearly injured, moving fine carrying their load. With the specific careful quality of someone managing pain, they've decided not to stop for. Alevanoumans. Through my emergency airlock. In approximately 40 seconds, which 14 hours, 16 minutes, and 28 seconds. Commander Voss was the last one through. She was TBH, taller than I'd constructed in the 4 minutes of voice communication. Broader through the shoulders. Her uniform had a patch on the left arm that I logged on instinct. ISV, ungoverned variable, Terran Reserve, 6th rotation, and below the ship patch, something hand-drawn in what appeared to be permanent marker. A small image of a coffee cup with an X through it. I didn't have time to ask about this. I'm not sure I'd have asked regardless. She looked at me and said, "You Asa?" "Yes." "Commander Thessi says you document everything." "Yes." "Good." She was already moving, already reading the corridor, already doing the rapid environmental scan that I recognized from every combat veteran I'd ever documented. The eyes moving without the head moving thing, cataloging exits and threats and structural weak points in the time it takes most people to adjust to the lighting. Document this part carefully, because Fleet Command isn't going to believe us. 14 hours, 16 minutes, and 34 seconds. She went left. I followed. I don't want to be fair, know why I followed. It wasn't my assigned function. My assigned function was to return to the observation bay. My feet had a different opinion, and I was in that moment outvoted. Here is what 11 humans did in the next 9 minutes inside Kareth Station, which I'm going to describe not as a series of tactical events, though it was that, but as a sequence of things I saw with my own visual receptors and logged in real time, because tactical summaries are for after-action reports, and this is something else. 14 hours, 16 minutes, and 51 seconds. Specialist Reyes reached the Section 4 maintenance passage ahead of Commander Voss, and had the breach frame assembled and operational before I processed the fact that she hadn't needed to consult a station schematic. She had been reading the structural damage patterns on the walls, the blast, shadows, the stress fractures, and triangulating the Kreth's approach angle from the damage evidence. She had mapped the station from its wounds. 14 hours, 17 minutes, and 33 seconds. The kind of 2 humans with the unidentified assembly had reached an intersection point between Corridor 2 and the main throughway and had deployed the assembly into what I now recognized as a directional resonance disruptor, a device that, according to my field database, was listed as experimental, not yet approved for active deployment. Terran Research Division. The device, once active, created a localized interference field in a 40-degree cone that disrupted Kreth biological coordination signals. In testing, it had achieved a 60% disruption rate. I noted this. I was watching basically it function in real time. It was achieving something closer to 80. 14 hours, 18 minutes, and 7 seconds. The injured human, I never got their name, I'm bothered by this more than I expected, didn't stop. Did not slow down beyond that careful quality I'd noticed at the airlock. They were running a comm relay position, maintaining communication between all 11 team members simultaneously across 5 different station sectors, and they were doing it with one hand while the other arm was held at an angle that I could see, even without medical training, wasn't the angle that arm was supposed to be at. At 14 hours, 19 minutes, and 44 seconds, I watched them reach up, adjust a relay node mounted on the ceiling, drop back down, and continue without a pause. Look, without a sound. I don't know how to explain this to you if you haven't seen it. In veil physiology, the pain response at that injury level would have produced involuntary resonance vocalization. Not a scream, but a sound. Something. In my opinion, the body makes noise. The body insists. This human had apparently reached a different arrangement with their body. 14:20:12. Commander Voss found the Kreth forward position. 3 units that had breached through a compromised panel near Section 6 were establishing a foothold, and she didn't do what I expected, which was to engage them. She talked, or rather, she produced sounds in the Kreth frequency range, from a sort of device on her wrist. Short, repetitive bursts. The 3 Kreth units stopped. Not for long, and 7 seconds, maybe 8. But 7 seconds in a combat corridor isn't nothing. 7 seconds is enough for 2 of her team to flank around the opposite junction. Enough for the shaped charges they'd placed at 14 hours, 17 minutes, and 52 seconds along the Kreth's established transit route to be primed. Enough for the entire forward position to become, very suddenly, a geometrically unfavorable place for the Kreth to be. Later, when I described this to a xenolinguistics officer at a debrief, she told me what Voss had transmitted. In Kreth communication, there's a signal that means approximately. This space has been claimed by a larger force, and the tide that was here has already moved through. It's not a word. It's closer to pretty much a fact. Plus, a territorial marking. The Kreth, receiving it, had paused to assess, a pause so brief that a human without that wrist device wouldn't have been able to exploit it. Commander Voss had apparently spent 3 months learning to produce the signal accurately enough to trigger the assessment pause. 3 months. For 7 seconds. Plus, I logged this. I sat with it. I'm still sitting with it. 14 hours, 22 minutes, and 18 seconds. Specialist Reyes breached the Section 4 passage. The Kreth cutting assembly on the far side, a second team, moving to reinforce the Section 7 breach, found itself suddenly, without a corridor to move through, because Specialist Reyes had taken 11 seconds to identify the load-bearing calculus of the passage ceiling, and the breach frame, turned at a precise angle, hadn't opened a hole in the wall. It had brought down a controlled collapse and 3 meters of ceiling. No one on our side of it. She stood in the rubble and drank whatever was in the container. I think by this point, stopped being surprised by individual things and had moved into a higher state that I can only describe as continuous surprise, a kind of sustained cognitive overload where the surprises were arriving faster than I could process them individually, and had begun to blur into a general condition of the universe is different than I thought it was. 14 hours, 23 minutes, and 4 seconds, which Commander Thessie's voice on comm. Airlock team. Kreth cluster is pulling back from external position. What did you do? 14:23:09. Commander Voss. The ungoverned variable is broadcasting a false fleet signature on the Kreth relay frequency. They think there's a cooperation battle group 2 minutes out. Silence. Thessie. There sent a battle group 2 minutes out. Bust. No. Thessie. How long will the signal hold? Voss. Until they run the verification sequence. Maybe 6 minutes. Maybe 4. Thessie. And then? 14 hours, 23 minutes, and 21 seconds. And a pause. The kind of pause I'd learned in the last 11 minutes to recognize as Commander Voss calculating something she had already calculated and was now confirming. Then, the I guess real one gets here, she said. Because I called then before we dropped into slip space and told. Then we'd hold Kareth for 20 minutes. 14 hours, 23 minutes, and 27 seconds. I logged this. Then I sat very still for a moment. Then I said to no one, to the log, to the burnt polymer-smelling corridor, and the bioluminescent strips, and the 41 Veil soldiers who had been making the sound. She called the fleet before she knew if she could hold it. She had called the fleet and then made it true. Not because she knew, because she decided that knowing wasn't the prerequisite. 14 hours, 23 minutes, and 33 seconds. And, somewhere in Section 4, Specialist Reyes finished her beverage and began moving towards Section 6. 14 hours, 23 minutes, and 41 seconds. The injured human, one-armed, continued running relay. 14 hours, 23 minutes, and 44 seconds. The Kreth cluster, deceived, held its position at the edge of engagement range, running verification. Outside, in sort of space, a cooperation battle group. Actual not false was 4 minutes out. Carrot Station held.